If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The Level Blue Futures Report 2024 sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledged increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business contexts that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today. Visit securityweekly.com/levelblue. Cybersecurity simplified. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Hannah Suter about non-human identities and the journey in creating secure defaults and embracing a culture of transparent security disclosures. I'm your host, Mike Shima, with a cat, here with John Kinsella and Kalyani Pawar, and we're here to talk about the last news segment of the year. So, John, Kalyani, don't worry. I'm pretty sure we haven't fixed everything as an industry within AppSec, so we'll have some news in 2025.
We came so close, though.
So close. But speaking of 25, I have to start with this article. A 25 years old curl bug. So we were actually just talking about curl last week with John about the AI junk, AI slop that gets sent from LLMs into bug bounty reports that just are essentially hallucinations of, oh, this looks like it's a problem, but it doesn't turn out to be. In this case, however, this was not a critical issue, but it was a bug that was introduced 9,039 days ago. So I was going to ask John and Kalyani what you were doing 9,039 days ago, but I can't answer that myself, so I don't want to put myself on the spot either.
We're probably getting ready for Y2K, right?
That's true. Yeah, either getting ready or maybe just recovering. So maybe that 39 days before Y2K hit, right?
I was pretending to be a full-grown adult. So.
Well, we'll check at the end of the episode how that pretending is going, Kalyani. But this was fun because, as our listeners can tell, it's fun to talk about time. But there's this aspect of the age of a bug that always makes me it gets me interested because it speaks to the idea of how was this missed for so long? Was it an area of code that people just didn't pay attention to? Is it an area of code that people did vet and looked at a long time, that SAST tools scanned? And it's not to that idea of ha-ha and poking fun at people and tools because, look what you missed. It's more of why did we miss it as a group? And how is this a regex we need to improve? Is this something else that needs to be changed to find this type of vuln better? Because this vuln might exist somewhere else too. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. But there's one other aspect at the end of this article that says not a C mistake that I'm going to come back to. But Kalyani, in your new experience as an adult AppSec practitioner, or at least pretending to be, was there anything about this that grabs your attention when we talk about like the time of bugs or the age of bugs in this aspect?
I think obviously we were talking about having more eyeballs and, sometimes they end up missing all of these things. But I also feel like we talk about SAST often and about all these different tests, right? But we don't incorporate the unconventional concept of technique of fuzzing a lot. And I'm wondering whose plate that falls onto, but that could be an interesting take to look at all these problems, right? Again, we're having a conversation of bandwidth here and who has the bandwidth to fuzz, but that could have avoided some of these mistakes.
So it's great you bring that up because we're going to actually talk about some work from the OpenSSF and the Linux Foundation report later on. But even in Daniel's post, he talks about curl, unsurprisingly, being part of Google's OSS fuzz. So there was fuzzing being done here. So it's one of those things. Is this how do you exercise this particular code path with a fuzzer just to get the right input, the right state machine? To do that. But the point still stands about, I do love fuzzing. This is one of the themes of the year. We would love to see more. and how do we make fuzzing better. One of the other things I do want to come around to is that not a C mistake, is that aspect that, there's Daniel Stenberg, he said very strongly that curl is going to remain C. There's not going to be any major rewrite into any other language. There's not a real reason to at the moment. But what was interesting, this was a logic error that, as he says, quote, would not have been avoided had we used another language than C. And what's interesting is that 40% of curls, security problems, can be blamed on C instead of a memory safety issue. But that's just about half, and only about half. So I do like to highlight that aspect that, yes, CISA is pushing their secure by design, pushing memory safety, but there's plenty of other things we need to do once we sign that pledge, once we start rewriting everything in Rust. So I guess that's the optimistic side of that. 2025 will still have a lot of vulns to talk about.
I can, excuse me, I can see why this went 25 years without discovery. So looking at the CVE itself, quote from a tiny bit of it, a curl transfer with a.tld that redirects to b.tld that uses a .NET RC like below with a match but no password specified for that second host would make curl pass on Alice password as a password to the second host, even if the second transfer is to a separate host. Yeah, how do you unit test for that, right? It's
Yeah, I mean, kudos for getting through that tongue twister, like very well, John. That was a great summary. But yeah, that's a crazy, state to get that state machine into, right?
I also feel like while we're talking about unit testing, I also feel like logic errors are somewhat like, devs having like mental models. And we know making mental models is not easy. It's not something that happens every day. And so many times we see so many logic flaws in just simple applications in our day-to-day, experiences. And that happens far often than we think. But also, I think because we have that security mindset, we are able to spot them more easily than maybe everybody else.
We do. But that's one of those things, too, that also we need to take that time investment to read through the code to understand what was the developer's intention or what is the intended behavior of this product, and how can we turn that use case into an abuse case, because that's just the fun play with language that I like to describe it. On that theme, Kalyani, I pulled in another article from Scott Piper. So this is the top AWS reInvent announcements for security teams in 2024. Now, this is over at the Wiz blog. And we had just spoken with Scott a couple weeks ago, so I thought this would be fun to throw in there. And what he talks about is resource control policies that were described, that were released, that makes life easier, which on the one hand I think is wonderful. But on the other hand, we're still saying the cloud environment getting better defaults, better paved roads, but that still isn't touching the application logic of of what we're building. That's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison, but I just wanted to point out that we as the AppSec world need to maintain a lot of eyeballs in a lot of places. But this AWS reInvent, I think it was over 500 different announcements. So, John, I don't know. I think you were trying to remember in alphabetical order all the service names that AWS has. So there's another 500 for you. Good luck.
I got through. So my favorite talk every year I listen to is Peter DeSantis' Monday Night Live. So I got through that one. I'm about halfway through the CEO's keynote. I haven't even gone looking for talks yet. I obviously know about some of these things, but it's a lot to get through.
Yeah, I know. We'll have a quiz next segment about here's SQS, SNS, STS, SOS. Which of those are not an AWS service?
Hey, as much as we want to bash AWS for having different services, I think a ray of hope here for me is how they're implementing these things in-house, in-built, right? Like blocking VPC access was supposed to be such a manual, full of configuration, a huge bandwidth task. But now if it's just implemented within AWS, it's just easier to win that fight of security versus velocity and how I can make a case for this. And also like RCPs, the aspect of governance, instead of just having SCPs, which is organization wide, I think having that more further granular control on resources, I think that's a big win for a lot of us.
Yeah, and I think that's a good callback to our conversation with Hannah, right? In the sense of what are better defaults that can be created for developers. So rather than developers having to individually do here's your hardening checklist now for your cloud environment, account wide, it's just done. So go forth and build that application logic so that more time can be spent on, how might this be abused? There is, speaking of large lists, so 500 new announcements from AWS, we tease that fondly. Less fondly here is a article, open source from Sonatype. Open source malware reaches more than 778,500 packages. So what's that? 750,000 more than the AWS announcements we were just talking about. But this is behind a registration wall, so apologies, but I did want to pull out one line from the report. NPM represented almost 99% of the malicious packages they identified in the past year. Now, on the one hand, this is what they scanned for. So you have a bit of an observation bias, is what they identified. But what it did bring to my mind is, why was malware so prevalent on NPM packages? Is this the type of thing that the NPM package management doesn't have as much security controls for account users, people creating accounts? Is it an account takeover, or is it just they don't scan, whereas PyPy is doing, and others are doing something different? And so it's that type of, what should the platform be doing better so that users don't have to go through and manually figure out, is this that one of the 750,000 packages that's, oops, I shouldn't have downloaded this. So go ahead. Who wants to solve that problem first? Who wants to defend NPM on their behalf?
I think it's a target-rich environment.
Fair,
so,
yeah.
Excuse me. I think that's a large portion of it. Is like the people creating the malware realize that that developer audience is, let's be honest, and probably a little less sophisticated in many cases. And as a result, they're more likely to install some of these packages. So I suspect that's a good chunk of it, unfortunately. And then, NPM, we've been talking about this for, a year now. They need to do something, but I don't know. Kalyani, thoughts?
I don't have a solution for the problem. I have a different thought here about how are we finding this so much later on in the whole cycle. Like, we have a malware and it's propagated to such latitude, and we're finding this so much later on in the cycle, but we should have had a more maybe in-house mechanism for vetting what should go as a package in a product. I think that's most of my take.
Yeah, and what's interesting in that too, I'll tie that into, there was another comment in the report as well. They were talking about just in recent years, this is quoting, NPM has faced surges of spam packages. And here's a critical part, some exploiting protocols like T.xyz to monetize downloads. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the .xyz domain, it tends to be just basically, this is a scam site, and ignore it. Not a great look. But T.xyz is basically building incentives to try to, using crypto, so yes, I had to sneak that in to one more at the end, sorry. But it's basically a way of trying to reward open source contributors for their work, which in spirit sounds great, but much like last week's discussion of AI slop, AI junk, it has perverse incentives. So now you get, rather than to Kalyani's point about who can help, who can vet, who can help us do the right thing about identifying packages or building just better software quality for the good packages out there, there's either just people doing typo fixes or really just cruft, almost cosmetic types of commits and changes, or sending PRs that are just flooding package owners, trying to basically trying to game the system of this to say, oh, this is how I get money because I just made these superficial contributions. So I think that's another thing that I would point to that. I do want to shift us away from here a second to a different article, because I will note in December 2022, NPM posted that they were requiring mandatory 2FA for packages with more than 1 million weekly downloads or that had more than 500 plus dependents. So I think they're already, if we just focus on what are people actually using, I think the worry about malware kind of changes. And there's a article here, Open Source Usage Trends and Security Challenges Revealed in New Study. So this is from the Linux Foundation and from OpenSSF, their Census III this year, that was looking at free and open source software and basically creating their, not even a top 10 list, their top 500 list of NPM and non-NPM packages, just with that eye towards what's the most prevalent out there, what is the most used, and are they under, to Kalyani's point, fuzzing like a Google's OSS fuzz? Are they if they're on NPM, do they have MFA enabled for their maintainers, etc.? I'm going to say one more thing and then throw it over to my co-host so I don't dominate. But on that Java and JavaScript NPM packages, I think this goes maybe more towards, I think you made the point there, John. To quote from this report, small packages are extremely common in the JavaScript NPM package system. For example, in NPM, 40% of the packages have 0 or 1 functions, and the average package has 112 lines of code. That's in contrast to Python, which has about 2,000 lines of code. So just 0 or 1 functions. I try to be positive, but you can tell that I'm trying to hold back from just asking, what's going on over at NPM? I know, yeah. Silence. Yeah.
I mean, it feels like, I'm sure, like, it'd be interesting to have a conversation with these guys. So, hey, if you're listening, do reach out to us. We'd love to have a very polite, respectful conversation. But yes. I'm guessing there is, from their point of view, there's reasons why they are, I'll say hesitant to respond to some of these things. And I'm guessing it's partially just the scale. Like, how do you actually manage this or deal with it? But sometimes it feels like there's low-hanging fruit like this of like, is there a reason? Is there a reason to accept? And this is something you can game, but is there a reason to accept these NPM packages that, as you say, have 0 or 1 functions? I think what was the one earlier this year? Was it not? That was a package?
I thought you were going to go to left shift from several years ago. I'm trying to remember this year,
but like. Yeah. It's some of these things it could be just like a few lines of code like that, so that's why they're so small. But it definitely feels like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that they could, have some type of action on.
Yeah, and it does go to, and this year there was also the polyfill. There was also security issues related to the ownership changes of that. But even polyfill, I'll try to make this argument that if you're expecting to deal with modern browsers, and even here, I would say modern browsers, which are updated within the last 2 to 3 years, I don't even think you need polyfill because there's so much standard support common around them that you shouldn't. At least I'm hoping. Here's me wishing now at the end of the year that you don't need to use those JavaScript-based shims for browser APIs. Mm-hmm. The other thing I'll point out too, then throw over to you, Kalyani, for your thoughts, is that, to be fair, looking at the top 500 NPM direct version agnostic packages, so that's the name of one of the lists in this report, is that React, DOM, and React are in the top 2. So that's pretty awesome. That's a great way. Let's avoid cross-site scripting as much as possible. AWS SDK jumped from 307 in the last report to number 7. So kudos to AWS. So keeping track of all those 500 plus services that they've got there. And another thing, security related, in that top 500 list, TypeScript jumped from 199 to 13. So there does seem to be good trends within this security, within how people are using NPM. But wow, that long tail of 0 and 1 functions does seem crazy. Kalyani, what have you been thinking now about as you're listening to John and I talk about this?
I was thinking about low-hanging fruit, and some fruit for thought here would be, How do you assess what's a low-hanging fruit unless you understand breadth of your attack surface? And I think that's also a major chunk of problem with NPM, right? Like it's so broad and vast. And so what is my low-hanging fruit outside of doing the conventional security things? I'm maybe probably making a case for NPM folks. It's not going harsh on them as compared to the both of you, but just some food for thought.
And it is. And I think part of the reason that I wanted to pull, focus on this Census III report was the motivations for this is to help the free and open source community figure out what is the importance, what are the important packages out there so that you can reinforce the security of them. Meaning that's why they have these top 500 lists. Let's focus on what people are using, how prevalent they are, and try to build that baseline for these packages. So it's that idea of, as you said, Kalyani, identifying what's the attack surface that we think is most impactful to our users, to the industry out there, and let's do something better. And I'll just pull on another one. So there's another list. This is the top 500 non-NPM. So this is the world of basically anything that isn't JavaScript. So Ruby, Go, Python, Rust, etc. These are this package list. The top 10 are basically lots of parsing, both XML and JSON and other types of formats. So lots of parsing, which is one of my favorite things. And Spring is also in that top 10. So it's just interesting to see if you, as maybe a bug bounty researcher out there or as a hacker, those are some pretty good areas to go dive into and start looking for impactful vulns. And if you're a developer, especially in the world of parsing, that would be a great area to consider how to use some of those memory safe languages on your end. So that was, I think, the last bit of fun I wanted to have with that particular report. John, I've got some other articles, but you've been reading the news as well. And I think you've got one where we could talk about a little bit of a callback to Hannah's idea of what should defaults be and what's the impact to customers about the defaults that you as a company choose.
So, this is an article about, I can't remember who found it off the top of my head, but some researchers, I think it was Oasis, found, I think partially by accident, let's take a step back. MFA tokens, if we have Google Authenticator or Duo or whatever you're using like that gives you a new number every 30 seconds, right? That's actually specified by RFC 6238. So part of that says, as I'm just saying there, is it should be 30 seconds. The idea is you want that number to be changing, right? And as it's changing that frequently, it's going to be very difficult to brute force a million numbers in that space. And then the second thing you'd want to do around that is to prevent that brute forcing is you would want to have some sort of throttle or back off or some way of making it, basically impossible for someone to go through that number. Like either if they get 2 or 3 wrong, you make them wait a few seconds or you kick them out, they have to try again, or there's different ways to do it, but that's what you want to do. Oasis realized that Microsoft is not doing this. So I think it looks like it was one implementation across Microsoft period, so Azure, 365, whatever they're calling it this week, all those type of things were the same thing. So what Microsoft was doing was instead of 30 seconds, it was a 3-minute timeout. So you're giving a attacker 6 times as long to get that that token right. And then it looks like they didn't have a back off either. So between those two, they're using the phrase that they're saying that they were able to bypass MFA. I don't think it's quite a bypass. I think that's a little strong of a word. But still, this is sort of an example of it's as you're saying, what are the defaults, but also when you're implementing these type of things, you've got to look at that RFC pretty closely. What's going on, why? And then maybe have a bit of a think about, okay, if we do it this way, what's that attacker mindset? Is this going to be, it might be, I'm guessing they did it because it would be easier for the users if they're fumbling or something and it takes 35 seconds. But yeah, so it's, I thought it was interesting to see, they've fixed this by now, but I thought it was interesting to see what you could say is a pretty basic thing and think about why or why not, or how would you actually make sure you implement that correctly.
Yeah, and when we talk about, I don't think we're ever going to get the RFC editors to sign the CISA Secure by Design pledge. But even if we're nerds, John, and we actually read an RFC, there's a line in it that we recommend. So this is a recommendation of a time step size of 30 seconds. And to quote again, since that's what I'm doing this week, this default value of 30 seconds is selected as a balance between security and usability. It's straight out of my intro for Hannah from last from the segment. So it's one of those things that they chose a different value from the recommendation, but as you're pointing out, as Oasis discovered here, perhaps they didn't think through what the consequences are, especially, and I'll note this too, threat models can change over time. Some of them can go away. We have a world of pretty much ubiquitous HTTPS and TLS, so that's why public Wi-Fi, basically safe to use. You don't need to go out and use a scammy VPN or a non-scammy VPN for that matter. But there's also perhaps brute forcing is more consequential or easier to pull off as well, or I would hope it wasn't forgotten. But those are the things that come to my attacker-minded mindset that Kalyani is reminding us to have this week. John, you were also looking at another fun, there was another article, and it was I'll just introduce it as New Dog, Old Tricks. And maybe this is the idea of looking at differences in time as kind of a callback to the first curl article I pulled out as well.
It's okay, Mike. You can say it's fun. This is a fun article for the hardware nerds out there. So this is a bit of a hardware hacking type thing again. And the folks at PT Security, they go through another of our fairly long blog posts that we seem to like, starting with talking about the history of different type of CF cards, the whole struggle of when you have a camera that's giving you the numbers are so high I have a hard time remembering. 50 megapixels. Definitely the 30s and the 40s, but some of these cameras now, a single image is massive, right? So if you've been out shooting all weekend, doing photography all weekend, and you want to bring that back and upload it into your computer, especially if you're professional, you want this now, right? So they want a faster and faster interface. We've seen this across USB and Thunderbolt and all sorts of different things. But what the folks did for the memory cards is the latest one is now called CF Express. And it turns out that CF Express actually leverages PCI Express to get that memory, but get those photos or whatever that data is into the computer in a very rapid manner. And these guys had a thought of looks like they're using DMA or something like that, direct memory access. Does that mean we might be able to design something we plug into that little slot on the computer, which would give us access to the memory on the laptop over PCI Express? And the answer is yes. So this sort of it's a fun read. They've got some a bit of humor and personality in here as they go through it. But yeah, at the end of the day, they created this custom board, which it looks like the SD card on the end. The last version of it they have is also they threw a Raspberry Pi Pico on there, so you've now got a programmable hacker tool that you can plug into someone's computer and be able to access something which nobody was really expecting. So it's, again, from an AppSec point of view, it's everyone had great intentions of we want fast, we want user experiences, but what's the other side of that? How do you make sure that doesn't get used for bad without me having to go and epoxy my port shut?
And they also there is a named vulnerability that they snuck in at the end, so they call this the damage card attack, sneaking a DMA reference in there. So yes, please do send us throughout 2025. Send us more of these hardware hacking, because I know John loves to find these, and they're fun to talk about because we can broaden our scope of discussion from just JavaScript or what have you, and also because I wanted to point out the idea that AppSec isn't just about let's use a memory safe language or let's talk about something like cross-site scripting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's more than just an OWASP top 10. Speaking of named vulns, I did throw in an article called Worst Fit that's basically an attack that is some really fun shenanigans done with best fit Unicode and character encoding. falls into parsing, but I just threw that in there. It doesn't look like it's supremely impactful, and we as an industry have talked about Unicode parsing and such in terms of phishing, internationalization and domain names, things like that. I think the coolest thing that I learned is that Microsoft is finally going to native UTF-8 for the representation on their across their operating system. So that was fun, but I figured we would end on the auditing the Ruby ecosystem's central package repository from Trail of Bits. And the reason I thought of this is that I think it answers maybe a bit of your question, Kalyani, about who has the time or who's looking at the attack surfaces of these package managers. And so Trail of Bits decided to take a look at Ruby, and they have, once again, as expected, a really nice write-up of what they did with their static testing. And they also have like a level 1, 2, and 3 table of recommendations related to MFA and authentication controls based on criticality of packages that gets to the point of just recommending have MFA for everyone rather than, for example, just the top 500. So that's the last thing that I wanted to highlight here. Kalyani, any parting words on either that article or something else that we talked about so far?
I think I was just thinking about how the ease of exploitability with hardware hacking, and I'm wondering if are the bug bounties on the hardware side more lucrative than on the AppSec side? And if I should be changing my target starting today? Holidays are around the corner. I need some more money.
There you go. Yeah, and I think we've talked in the past that some of the you need more than a browser. So I was always the lazy hacker, and I went web application security because all you need is a browser and maybe something like Z-Attack proxy. Low barrier to entry.
Yeah.
Hardware hacking does require some alligator clips, a couple of other things to make the magic smoke appear from chips. But I think in the past we've seen maybe $50 for equipment, maybe at the high end $500 for I'll just say modern investment in hardware hacking. So it's not it's not as free as just downloading a browser.
Yeah.
But John, I don't know if you would have any other insights on there about that. The entry and the investments into hardware hacking.
Higher. You can get into the thousands pretty quickly. It's one of the things we were talking about. I think last year the ability to do voltage fuzzing or voltage spiking on chips. If you start going down that path, the devices are mid 3 figures, but you can definitely get into these things cheaper, right? And sort of start off, don't be quite so specialized, or what you see is you get more specialized, or if you need like higher frequencies or clock ranges or things like that, that's when it starts getting really pricey. But yeah, I've never looked at bug bounties on the hardware side. That'd be interesting to look at, Kalyani, just to see what's out there, what's available. Probably going to be less people going after them.
Yeah, and we actually had, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, we had Maggie Haregi on, who was talking about Intel launching their hardware bug bounty specifically. And some of the challenges she was highlighting is that there's also just a learning curve and accessibility to these devices. So it's Intel was very much trying to work on an invitation, getting researchers to come in and just having them talk with Intel engineers to say, here's what we thought of, here's what we tried to do, here's what we wanted to do, go hack. Or as well as here we are to answer questions as you're doing this. And I will also give a shout out to 404 Media, who's been having a fun last couple of months about hardware hacking with red boxes and old and now defunct systems that lots of hackers are out there looking to play with, in the sense of just, how do I make this work? Or how do I make this run Doom? So I don't know that we've hit a bug bounty aspect on this side of those articles, but keep an eye on 404 Media, support them, great resource. And that's been a fun thing to see. So that's my final words. Kalyani, what should people be keeping an eye on for 2025? Anything that you would recommend reading or that you're hoping to see for next year?
It's too early for that question.
Good answer.
I just want to enjoy my hot chocolate right now. So it's too early.
Fair enough. Yes, hopefully all the AppSec folks out there, and especially the incident response folks, can have a quiet next 2 weeks, end the year with some hot chocolate, and hang out with Kalyani and maybe share some fun stories about security at startups. So we'll wish you the best for that, Kalyani. John, how about you? Is it going to be another couple weeks of hot chocolate, or is there some fun reading that you want to share?
I think I'm aiming more for the mulled wine or the Glühwein, but obviously what our listeners need to be doing is listening and reading more of Application Security Weekly.
Absolutely. So I love that as an ending message. As a tease for our listeners, I will be, since we are an AppSec podcast in 3 hosts, I'm going to revive AppSec in 3 words for 2025. So, John, Kalyani, we're out of time this segment, but first episode of 2025, we'll be asking you what your AppSec in 3 words is, and we'll see how we start off the year. So I want to say thank you, Kalyani. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please remember to subscribe, share on the socials, check out the show notes, and speaking of next year, check out On the Horizon by Vampire Stepdad. We'll see you next year on Application Security Weekly.